I never thought building a heated workshop in my backyard would turn into a legal nightmare. But when Susan Whitmore spotted it from her second-floor window, I knew my peaceful life in Riverside, California, was about to get complicated. My name is Isaac Brennan, and I had spent 3 months and nearly $40,000 constructing what I considered my dream workshop on my property at 2847 Willow Creek Lane. The workshop was a beauty, measuring 30 by 40 feet with radiant floor heating, professional-grade electrical wiring, industrial ventilation, and enough space to house my woodworking equipment, metalworking tools, and my small collection of vintage motorcycles I was restoring. The structure sat perfectly within my property lines, 20 feet from the rear boundary and 15 feet from the side fence, well beyond any setback requirements. I had pulled all the proper permits from Riverside County, hired licensed contractors, and made sure every single aspect met building codes. The inspector had signed off on everything just 2 weeks prior, complimenting the quality of the construction and the attention to detail. I felt proud standing in that workshop, breathing in the smell of fresh lumber and new paint, imagining all the projects I would complete there. That sense of peace lasted exactly 3 days. I was organizing my tool wall when I heard the sharp knock on the workshop door. The sun was just starting to set, casting long shadows across my yard. I opened the door to find Susan Whitmore standing there with a clipboard, her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful, wearing a cream-colored blazer despite the 75-degree weather. "Mr. Brennan, I am Susan Whitmore, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries like hello or good evening. "I need to discuss this structure you have erected on your property." "Nice to meet you too," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "What can I help you with?" "This workshop," she said, waving her hand dismissively at my pride and joy, "was constructed without HOA approval. According to our covenants, conditions, and restrictions, any structure over 120 square feet requires Architectural Review Committee approval before construction begins." I felt my stomach drop slightly, but I maintained my composure. I was not aware of that requirement. "I purchased this home 8 months ago, and I reviewed all the paperwork. I do not recall seeing anything about an Architectural Review Committee." "Ignorance is not an excuse," Susan said flatly. "The CCRs are recorded with the county and were included in your closing documents. I am certain of it." "Even if that is true, the workshop is already built and passed all county inspections," I pointed out. "It meets every building code requirement." Susan clicked her pen repeatedly, a sound that immediately grated on my nerves. "County codes and HOA regulations are separate matters. I will need you to submit a retroactive application to the Architectural Review Committee. There is a $500 application fee and a $250 expedited review fee since the structure is already complete. $750 just to review something that is already built and inspected?" I asked, unable to hide my disbelief. "Those are the fees as outlined in the CCRs," she said. Her eyes drifted past me into the workshop, and I watched her expression change from bureaucratic coldness to something resembling hunger. "My goodness, you have heating in here, and that is quite a spacious layout." "Yeah, radiant floor heating. Essential for working out here during winter months," I explained. She stepped past me without invitation, walking into my workshop and looking around with an appraising eye. Her heels clicked on the concrete floor as she examined every corner. "This is remarkably well built. Climate-controlled too, I see. The lighting is excellent. This space would be perfect for community use." "Community use?" I repeated, following her as she continued her unauthorized tour. Yes, the HOA has been looking for a suitable location for various community activities. We currently rent space at the community center downtown for our monthly meetings, social gatherings, and craft groups. This workshop would serve those purposes admirably, and it would save the HOA considerable expense. She turned to face me with what I suppose she thought was a winning smile. I am prepared to offer you a fair arrangement. I built this for my personal use, I said firmly. I restore motorcycles and do woodworking. This is not meant to be a community space. Susan's smile vanished. Mr. Brennan, you are part of a community now. Being a good neighbor means contributing to the collective well-being. I am offering you an opportunity to rectify your violation by putting this space to good use for everyone. By letting the HOA use my $40,000 workshop for free, I asked, my voice hardening. By being a team player, she countered. And in exchange, I could recommend that the Architectural Review Committee approve your structure without requiring any modifications or fines. I crossed my arms. So you want me to let the HOA use my personal property, which I legally built with proper permits, in exchange for not punishing me for rules I was never properly informed about? I see you are not interested in being reasonable, Susan said, her voice turning icy. Very well. I will submit your case to the board. Expect to receive formal documentation of your violation within 5 business days. The daily fine for an unapproved structure is $100, accruing from the date of completion. According to my records, that was 12 days ago. You already owe $1,200. This is insane, I said, struggling to keep my anger in check. You cannot just impose arbitrary fines on legally constructed buildings. I can and I will, as authorized by the CCRs you agreed to when you purchased your property. Good evening, Mr. Brennan. She walked past me toward the door, then paused. For what it is worth, I am giving you 1 week to reconsider my offer. After that, the fines will continue to accumulate, and I will have no choice but to pursue legal action to enforce the covenants. She left, and I stood there in my workshop feeling like I had just been mugged. I immediately went inside my house and began searching through all my closing documents, looking for any mention of HOA rules. After 2 hours of reading through hundreds of pages, I found a single paragraph buried in the preliminary title report that mentioned the property was subject to CCRs recorded in 1998. There was a recording number, but no actual copy of the CCRs themselves. The next morning, I drove to the Riverside County Recorder's office and requested a copy of the CCRs. The clerk found them in the system and printed out a 47-page document. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and read through every single page. Sure enough, there it was on page 32. Any structure exceeding 120 square feet required Architectural Review Committee approval prior to construction. But as I kept reading, I found something interesting. The CCRs explicitly stated that the HOA could not unreasonably deny any structure that met all county building codes and did not violate any specific architectural guidelines. I flipped to the section outlining those guidelines. They were extremely vague, mostly focusing on maintaining property values and aesthetic harmony with the neighborhood. Nothing about workshops specifically. Nothing about size limitations beyond the 120 threshold. Nothing about materials, colors, or design that my workshop violated. I also found the fine schedule Susan had mentioned. $100 per day for unapproved structures. But there was a clause that stated fines could not begin until the homeowner received written notice of the violation and had 30 days to cure it. Susan had only verbally informed me yesterday. No written notice. No 30-day cure period. Any fines she claimed I owed were premature according to the HOA's own rules. Feeling slightly better armed with information, I decided to consult with an attorney before doing anything else. I found a real estate lawyer named Marcus Chen who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Riverside, occupying the third floor of a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Marcus was in his early 40s, wearing a crisp navy suit, and he listened intently as I explained the situation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You are in a better position than you think. First, they cannot retroactively impose fines without proper written notice and cure period. Second, they cannot legally force you to allow community use of your private property. Third, if your structure meets all county codes and does not violate specific architectural guidelines, they will have a hard time denying approval." "So what should I do?" I asked. "Submit the application, but do not pay any fines until they follow proper procedure. Document everything. Keep copies of all correspondence. If they do send you written notice, you will have 30 days to either remove the structure or appeal to the board. I am confident we can win an appeal based on what you have told me." He slid a business card across his desk. "Keep me updated. If they escalate beyond strongly worded letters, give me a call and we will respond appropriately." I left his office feeling much more confident. I went home and spent the evening filling out the architectural review application, providing detailed photographs, copies of all my building permits, the final inspection certificate, and a site survey showing the workshop's location relative to property lines. I wrote a check for $750, made copies of everything, and mailed it via certified mail the next morning. 3 days later, I received the written notice of violation Susan had promised. It came in an official-looking envelope with the HOA logo. The letter stated that I had constructed an unapproved structure and had 30 days from the date of the letter to either remove it or receive approval from the Architectural Review Committee. It mentioned nothing about the application I had already submitted. It also stated that daily fines would begin accruing if I failed to comply within 30 days. At least, they were following proper procedure now. I filed the letter away and continued using my workshop. I was midway through rebuilding the engine on a 1972 Honda CB 750 when my phone rang a week later. Unknown number, I answered anyway. "Mr. Brennan, this is Susan Whitmore. I received your application for the workshop." "Good. When will the Architectural Review Committee meet to consider it?" I asked. "That is what I am calling about. The committee has some concerns about the workshop's impact on neighboring property values. Before we can schedule a hearing, we need you to provide an independent appraisal showing that the structure does not negatively impact surrounding homes." I wiped grease from my hands onto a shop rag. That was not mentioned anywhere in the CCRs as an application requirement. "It is a reasonable request given the size and nature of the structure," Susan said. "The committee reserves the right to request additional documentation as needed to make an informed decision." "And how much will this independent appraisal cost me?" "I would estimate between $500 and $800. Of course. I will take that under consideration," I said noncommittally. "Mr. Brennan, I hope you understand that the committee is simply trying to protect the community's interests. If you would reconsider my original proposal regarding community use of the space, I am certain we could expedite this entire process." "Let me make something clear," I said, my patience wearing thin. "That workshop is my private property. I built it legally with proper permits. I am not turning it into a community center. I have submitted all required documentation for approval. If the committee needs anything else that is actually outlined in the CCRs, I am happy to provide it. But I am not paying for unnecessary appraisals or jumping through arbitrary hoops. Silence on the other end for a long moment. Then Susan spoke, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I see. Well, the committee will review your application at next month's meeting. You should receive notification of the decision within 45 days. Next month. The CCR state that applications must be reviewed within 30 days of submission. The CCRs state that the committee will make reasonable efforts to review applications in a timely manner. Next month is the earliest the full committee can convene. She hung up before I could respond. I called Marcus Chen and updated him. He laughed, though not in a way that suggested anything was funny. Classic delay tactic. They are hoping you will either give in to their demands or accumulate enough fines to make fighting them expensive. Do not worry. If they do not meet the 30-day deadline, that actually strengthens your position. Keep detailed records of all the dates. I did exactly that. I created a spreadsheet tracking every interaction, every date, every requirement they imposed. Days turned into weeks. I continued working in my workshop, making significant progress on the Honda, and starting to restore a vintage Triumph Bonneville I had picked up from an estate sale. My neighbor to the east, an elderly man named Frank Delgado, came by one afternoon. Frank was in his late 70s, retired from the fire department, and we had become friendly since I moved in. He walked with a slight limp from an old injury, but had a sharp mind and sharper sense of humor. "Isaac, my boy, I've got to warn you about something," Frank said, accepting the cold beer I offered him. We sat on folding chairs in my driveway, enjoying the mild October weather. "Susan came by my house yesterday asking questions about your workshop." "What kind of questions?" "Whether you make a lot of noise. Whether I have seen commercial vehicles coming and going. Whether you are running some kind of business out of there. I told her you have been nothing but a perfect neighbor and to leave you alone, but I thought you should know she is building a case." "Building a case for what?" Frank took a long drink of his beer. "For whatever she wants. Susan has been HOA president for 6 years now. She has driven out 3 families in that time, always finding some violation or another, making their lives hell until they sell and leave. She tried it with me 5 years back, said my front lawn was not green enough. I told her I was conserving water during the drought, and if she wanted to pay my water bill, I would be happy to run my sprinklers more. She backed off because I have lived here since 1983 and know where all the bodies are buried, so to speak. Did she really force families to move? The Johnsons, 2 streets over. She claimed their kids' swing set was an unapproved structure. Fined them until they took it down, then their kids had nowhere to play. They left 6 months later. The Patels over on Elm Street, she decided their holiday decorations were too elaborate and not in keeping with neighborhood standards. Daily fines for weeks. They sold their house and moved to Morno Valley. Then there was the young couple on Oak, I forget their names, but Susan claimed they were running an illegal daycare because the wife watched her nieces and nephews a few days a week. More fines, more harassment. They left too. I felt anger building in my chest. How does she get away with this? Because most people on the HOA board are either scared of her or benefit from her little power trips. She keeps the neighborhood looking pristine, property values stay high, and most people are too busy to pay attention to what she does to individual homeowners. Plus, fighting an HOA is expensive. Most folks decide it is easier to just move than to wage a legal battle. Frank crushed his empty beer can with one hand. but you strike me as someone who does not back down easy. I spent $40,000 on that workshop, Frank. I am not tearing it down, and I am not letting her turn it into a community clubhouse. If she wants a fight, she will get one." Frank grinned. "Good man. If you need someone to testify on your behalf about what a fine neighbor you have been, you let me know." The Architectural Review Committee meeting was scheduled for November 15th, 43 days after I submitted my application. Already past their own 30-day deadline. Marcus had advised me to attend in person and bring him along. The meeting was held at Susan's house, a sprawling 2-story Mediterranean-style home at the end of my street with immaculate landscaping and a 3-car garage. Susan answered the door wearing a burgundy blazer and black slacks, her expression neutral. "Mr. Brennan, Attorney Chen, please come in." The meeting was held in her formal dining room around a large mahogany table. 4 other people sat there, each with a folder in front of them. Susan introduced them. Robert Hendricks, the vice president, a balding man in his 50s who owned a chain of car dealerships. Patricia Morrison, the treasurer, a thin woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain. David Yu, the secretary, a younger Asian man who looked uncomfortable being there. And Linda Kowalski, a committee member at large, a heavy-set woman in her 40s with kind eyes. Susan sat at the head of the table and called the meeting to order with all the formality of a court proceeding. She had everyone introduce themselves for the record, and David took notes on a laptop. "We are here to review the application submitted by Isaac Brennan regarding the workshop structure at 2847 Willow Creek Lane," Susan began. "Mr. Brennan, would you like to present your case?" I stood, feeling Marcus's reassuring presence beside me. "Thank you." As outlined in my application, I constructed a 30 by 40-foot workshop on my property earlier this year. The structure was built according to all Riverside County building codes. I obtained all proper permits, hired licensed contractors, and passed all required inspections. The workshop is used for my personal hobbies, primarily motorcycle restoration and woodworking. It meets all setback requirements and does not violate any specific architectural guidelines outlined in the CCRs. "The structure was built without prior HOA approval," Susan interjected. "Because I was not aware of that requirement," I responded. "The CCRs were not provided to me during my home purchase. I discovered the requirement only after Miss Whitmore informed me of it. I then immediately submitted this application to rectify the oversight." Patricia spoke up, her voice quavering slightly. "The structure is quite large. Does it not block your neighbor's view? My neighbors to the rear are separated from my property by a drainage easement and a line of mature trees. The workshop is not visible from their property. My neighbors to the sides, including Frank Delgado, who has lived here for 40 years, have expressed no concerns about the structure. I have a letter from Mr. Delgado supporting my application in the materials I submitted." Robert leaned forward. "What about noise? Are you running power tools at all hours?" "I work normal daytime hours when I am in the workshop, typically between 9 in the morning and 6 in the evening on weekends. The workshop is well insulated, which dampens sound considerably." Again, none of my immediate neighbors have complained about noise. David Yu looked up from his laptop. "I reviewed the county inspection reports. Everything appears to be in order from a code compliance perspective. The structure is well built and professionally done." Susan shot him a look that could freeze water. "County codes and HOA standards are not the same thing, David." "I understand that," David said carefully, "but the CCRs state we cannot unreasonably deny a structure that meets all county codes and does not violate specific architectural guidelines." I have reviewed those guidelines, and I am not seeing what this workshop violates. Aesthetic harmony, Susan said firmly. The workshop is utilitarian in design and does not match the architectural style of Mr. Brennan's home. Marcus finally spoke. If I may address that point. The CCRs define aesthetic harmony as structures that do not create a visual blight or substantially detract from neighborhood character. Mr. Brennan's workshop is located in his backyard, not visible from the street, constructed with quality materials matching the color palette of his home. Several other properties in this neighborhood have similar backyard structures, including sheds, gazebos, and at least 2 other workshops that I observed during my site visit. Were those structures all approved by this committee? Silence around the table. Susan's jaw tightened. Those structures are grandfathered in. Are they? Marcus pressed. Because according to county records, at least one of those workshops was built in 2019, well after the current CCRs were adopted. Did that homeowner receive approval? That is not relevant to this application, Susan said coldly. It is absolutely relevant if the committee is applying standards inconsistently, Marcus countered. Linda Kowalski cleared her throat. I think Attorney Chen makes a fair point. I have driven by Mr. Brennan's property several times since receiving this application. The workshop is barely visible even from the side street. It appears well constructed and not out of character for the neighborhood. I am inclined to approve the application. I second that inclination, David said. I do not see grounds for denial. Susan looked at Robert and Patricia. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I think we need more time to consider this. There are significant concerns about setting a precedent. What precedent? Linda asked. That homeowners can build code-compliant structures on their own property. That homeowners can ignore HOA procedures and then expect retroactive approval, Susan said sharply. If we approve this, it sends a message that our rules do not matter. Mr. Brennan did not willfully ignore procedures, David pointed out. He was genuinely unaware of the requirement and submitted an application as soon as he learned of it. That shows good faith. The debate continued for another 30 minutes. Marcus and I answered more questions about the workshop's construction, materials, and intended use. Patricia asked about property values, and I pointed out that a high-quality outbuilding typically increases property value rather than decreasing it. Robert asked about potential business use, and I assured him it was purely for personal hobbies. Finally, Susan called for a vote. All in favor of approving the application. Linda and David raised their hands immediately. Patricia hesitated, glanced at Susan, then reluctantly raised her hand as well. All opposed. Susan and Robert raised their hands. The application is approved 3-2, David announced, typing into his laptop. Mr. Brennan, you will receive written confirmation within 5 business days. Susan's face had gone rigid with barely contained anger. This meeting is adjourned. As Marcus and I walked to our cars, he said quietly, that went better than expected. 3-2 is a clear approval. She cannot overturn it without calling a special session and getting a different result, which seems unlikely. So this is over, I asked hopefully. Marcus gave me a sympathetic look. With a reasonable person. Yes, with Susan Whitmore, I would not count on it. Watch your back. Document everything. If she retaliates in any way, call me immediately. He was right to be cautious. I received the written approval 5 days later, a terse letter stating that the Architectural Review Committee had approved my workshop structure and no further action was required. I thought maybe Susan would leave me alone now that she had lost the fight. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I was in my workshop sanding down the fuel tank on the Triumph when I heard a vehicle pull into my driveway. I walked outside to find a Riverside County Code enforcement truck parked there. A woman in her 30s with a county badge clipped to her belt stood looking at my workshop with a clipboard. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Are you Isaac Brennan, the property owner?" "Yes." "I am Officer Jennifer Ortiz with Riverside County Code Enforcement. We received a complaint that you are operating a commercial motorcycle repair business out of this residential property without proper permits or zoning approval." My stomach sank. "I am not running a business. This is for personal use only. Can I see inside the workshop?" I considered refusing but decided cooperation was the better approach. I led her inside. She looked around at my 2 motorcycles in various states of disassembly, my organized tool wall, my welding equipment, and my workbenches covered in parts and supplies. "This is quite an extensive setup for personal use," she observed, writing notes. "I am passionate about motorcycle restoration. Those 2 bikes are mine. I am not repairing bikes for customers or running a business." "Do you have receipts showing you purchased these motorcycles?" "Yes, in my house. Would you like me to get them, please?" I went inside and retrieved the bill of sale for both motorcycles, along with the vehicle registration paperwork showing I was the registered owner of each. Officer Ortiz reviewed them carefully. "What about the welding equipment? That is commercial grade. I bought it for my own use. There is no law against owning quality tools." She continued her inspection, taking photographs and asking questions. "Finally," she said, "I am not seeing clear evidence of commercial activity. However, I need to inform you that operating a business out of a residentially zoned property requires special permits. If we receive additional complaints or evidence of commercial operations, we will have to open a formal investigation." "I understand. But to be clear, I am not operating any business." After she left, I immediately called Marcus. "Susan called code enforcement on me. Can you prove it was her? Who else would it be? This happened right after the HOA approved my workshop. Probably her, but probably does not matter in court. Here is what you need to do. Keep meticulous records showing these motorcycles are yours. Do not work on anyone else's vehicles, even as favors for friends. Do not accept any money for any work you do in that workshop. She is trying to build a case that you are operating a commercial business in violation of zoning laws." I followed his advice religiously. I worked only on my own projects. When my buddy from work asked if I could help him rebuild his carburetor, I politely declined and recommended a local shop. When Frank asked if I could weld a broken bracket on his patio furniture, I said I would be happy to show him how to do it, but could not do it myself. People thought I was being weird, but I was not taking any chances. December came, and I started to relax a bit. Maybe Susan had finally given up. The holidays were approaching, and I was looking forward to some peace. Then I got the call from my buddy Jake, who worked at the Riverside Fire Department. "Hey man, weird question. Did you request an inspection of your workshop?" "No, why?" "Because we got a request routed through the system for a fire safety inspection of a residential workshop at your address. The request came from your HOA, claiming there were concerns about fire hazards from welding operations and improper storage of flammable materials." "Jake, my workshop is up to code. The county inspected everything when I built it." "I believe you, but we still have to respond to the request. I am actually scheduled to do the inspection next Tuesday. I will make it as painless as possible, but you might want to make sure everything is by the book. Check your fire extinguisher is current, flammables are in proper containers, ventilation is working, all that stuff." I spent the weekend making sure every single safety item in my workshop was perfect. Fire extinguishers fully charged and properly mounted. All paints, solvents, and fuels in approved safety containers stored in a metal cabinet. Welding area clear of combustibles. Ventilation system functioning perfectly. Smoke detectors installed and tested. I even bought a new first aid kit and mounted it prominently on the wall. Jake came by Tuesday afternoon in his inspection uniform. He was professional and thorough, checking everything. When he finished, he handed me a copy of his report. "You are golden. Everything is compliant, better than most home workshops I have seen. I will submit this report and that should close the matter." "Thanks, Jake. I appreciate you being straight with me." "No problem, but between you and me, whoever filed that complaint was fishing for violations." The language in the request was very specific, like they were hoping we would find particular issues. "Watch yourself." Susan was escalating. She had tried to force me to give her access to my workshop, failed. Tried to deny my architectural application, failed. Called code enforcement, failed. Called the fire department, failed. I knew she was not done. Sure enough, 3 days before Christmas, I found a letter in my mailbox from the HOA's attorney. It was a cease and desist letter demanding that I stop operating a commercial business from my property. It cited unnamed, multiple complaints from neighbors about noise, traffic, and commercial activity. It threatened legal action if I did not immediately cease all business operations. I took the letter straight to Marcus. He read it and actually laughed out loud. "This is garbage. It is all vague accusations with no specific evidence. They are trying to intimidate you." Should I respond? Absolutely. "We will send a response stating that you are not operating any business, that all activity on your property is personal in nature and fully compliant with all zoning laws and HOA regulations. We will also demand that they provide specific evidence of these alleged complaints, including dates, times, and the nature of the alleged violations. They won't be able to provide it because it does not exist." Marcus drafted a strongly worded response and sent it the day after Christmas. We never received a reply. January arrived, and I had been living with this HOA nightmare for 4 months. I was tired of constantly looking over my shoulder, tired of documenting everything, tired of being harassed for legally using my own property. I needed to do something to change the dynamic. That is when I had an idea. If Susan wanted to use my workshop so badly, maybe I should let people use it. For a fee. I spent a weekend building a professional website advertising my workshop for rent. Premium heated workshop space available for rent in Riverside, CA. Fully equipped with professional tools, climate control, and ample space for automotive work, woodworking, metalworking, and more. Perfect for enthusiasts who need temporary workspace for their projects. Hourly and daily rates available. I set my hourly rate at $50 with a 4-hour minimum. Daily rate was $300. Weekly rate was $1,500. The prices were intentionally high but not unreasonable for a fully equipped professional workspace. I posted the listing on several websites: Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and a few specialty forums for automotive and woodworking enthusiasts. I made sure to mention that the space was on private residential property being used for personal workshop purposes, and that renters would be using the space under my supervision as allowed guests. The first call came 2 days later from a guy named Tom who was restoring a 1967 Ford Mustang. He needed a warm place to work on bodywork for a few days. I explained my rates and requirements. He agreed and showed up Saturday morning with his supplies. I stayed in the workshop the whole time he was there, working on my own projects while he worked on his. We actually had a great time talking about cars and restoration techniques. He paid me $200 for 4 hours of space rental and said he would definitely be back. Word spread quickly through the local enthusiast community. I rented the space to a furniture maker who needed to use my table saw for a custom project. I rented it to a woman who was building a custom steel gate for her property and needed welding equipment. I rented it to a teenager and his dad who were restoring a vintage Jeep together. Every transaction was documented with a signed rental agreement and payment receipt. I was making pretty good money, enough to cover my monthly HOA dues and then some. More importantly, I was networking with interesting people and learning new skills from watching them work. It felt like a win-win situation. Then Susan found out. I was in the workshop on a Tuesday evening with a renter who was using my tools to build custom cabinets when Susan appeared in the doorway. Her face was red, and her hands were clenched into fists. What exactly is going on here? She demanded. "Good evening, Susan. This is my workshop and this gentleman is my guest," I said calmly. "Your guest who is paying you money, I assume. You are running a commercial rental business from residential property." Her voice was shrill with anger. "I am allowing guests to use my personal workshop space under my supervision. There is no law against that. This is a clear violation of residential zoning. You cannot operate a business from this property." She pulled out her phone. "I am calling code enforcement right now." "Go ahead," I said. "I have already consulted with the county zoning department and an attorney. As long as I am not conducting retail operations, not creating excessive traffic or noise, and not violating any specific zoning regulations, I am within my rights to rent space on my property. It is no different than renting out a room in my house through Airbnb or renting my driveway for parking." Her face went from red to purple. "The HOA will not tolerate this. You will be hearing from our attorney," she stormed off. My renter, a mild-mannered accountant named Steve who was building a toy chest for his daughter, looked shaken. "Is she always like that?" "Pretty much. Do not worry about it. She has been harassing me for months. This is nothing new." But it was new. Susan was about to escalate things to a whole different level. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA's attorney with an attachment. It was a formal complaint filed with Riverside County Code Enforcement, alleging that I was operating an illegal commercial workshop on residential property, in violation of zoning regulations. The complaint included dates, times, and even photos of different vehicles parked in my driveway during rental periods. Susan had been surveilling my property and documenting everything. The complaint was detailed and extensive. It cited specific sections of county zoning code. It included statements from concerned neighbors about increased traffic and noise. It demanded an immediate investigation and potential criminal charges for illegal business operation. I called Marcus immediately. We met at his office that afternoon. He reviewed the complaint and looked concerned for the first time since I had started working with him. "This is serious," he admitted. "They are pushing the county to take action. We need to build a solid defense quickly." But I checked the zoning laws. What I am doing is legal. It is a gray area. You are right that renting space on your property is generally allowed, but the county could argue that the frequency and nature of your rental activity constitutes a commercial operation requiring a business permit and potentially different zoning. We need to establish that this is casual personal property sharing, not a systematic business. How do I do that? First, reduce the frequency of rentals immediately. No more than 2 or 3 times per week, and never more than 1 rental per day. Second, we need to clearly document that you are present during all rentals, and that the primary use of the workshop remains your personal projects. Third, We should proactively contact the county zoning department and request a formal opinion on whether your activity requires any special permits. I followed his advice. I reduced my rental schedule significantly, turning down several requests. I started keeping detailed logs showing how much time I spent on my own projects versus time the space was rented. I documented everything meticulously. Marcus submitted a formal request to the county zoning department, asking for a written opinion on whether my workshop rental activity required any special permits or violated any regulations. We included detailed information about the nature of the activity, the frequency, the types of uses, and the fact that I remained present during all rentals. The response took 6 weeks. During that time, Susan ramped up her campaign against me. I started receiving violations notices from the HOA for increasingly petty things. My trash cans were visible from the street for more than 2 hours after collection day. My lawn had weeds exceeding 4 inches in height. My house numbers were faded and needed repainting. My mailbox post was showing weather damage. Each violation came with a fine schedule. $50 if corrected within 7 days, $100 if corrected within 14 days, then an additional $25 per day after that. I corrected every single violation immediately and took time-stamped photos as proof, but the harassment was exhausting. Frank came by again one evening. "Isaac, I have to tell you, Susan is going door to door trying to get people to sign a petition against you. She is claiming you are running some kind of illegal chop shop, that property values are going to plummet, that there will be dangerous criminals coming and going at all hours. That is insane. I rent my workshop a few times a week to hobbyists working on personal projects. It is all documented and legal. I know that, and I told her to peddle her garbage somewhere else, but she has got a few people worked up. The Hendersons 2 doors down signed her petition. So did the Chens across the street. They are new to the neighborhood and don't know any better." "How many signatures does she have?" "I think she said something about 15 households. She needs a majority of the neighborhood to support her petition to call for a special HOA meeting to discuss taking action against you." I felt defeated. "Frank, I am so tired of this. I just wanted to build a workshop and pursue my hobbies. This has turned into a full-time nightmare." "Do not give up, son. Bullies like Susan count on people getting tired and giving in. That is how they win. You keep fighting. You are in the right here." The letter from the county zoning department finally arrived in late February. Marcus called me as soon as he received his copy. "Good news. The county says you do not need any special permits as long as the workshop remains an accessory use to your residential property. You do not employ anyone. You do not maintain regular business hours or signage, and the activity does not create a nuisance. They consider what you are doing to be similar to renting a spare bedroom or garage space, which is explicitly allowed under residential zoning. So I am in the clear. From a zoning perspective, yes. But Susan is not going to stop. She has enough signatures for her petition. The HOA is calling a special meeting next week to discuss your workshop rental activity. The special meeting was held at the community center on a Thursday evening. Marcus advised me to attend with legal representation. When we arrived, the room was packed with at least 60 people, far more than usually attended HOA meetings. Susan had clearly rallied the troops. Susan called the meeting to order and immediately launched into her presentation. She had prepared a PowerPoint with photos of my workshop, my website advertising rental space, vehicles in my driveway during rental periods, and screenshots of my online listings. "What we have here is a clear case of illegal commercial activity in our residential neighborhood," Susan declared. Mr. Brennan has turned his property into a commercial workshop, with strangers coming and going at all hours, conducting industrial activities, creating noise and traffic that disrupt our peaceful community. This is exactly the kind of activity our HOA exists to prevent. She clicked to a slide showing my rental rates. He is making thousands of dollars per month running this illegal business while the rest of us follow the rules and maintain our properties appropriately. This is not just a violation of zoning laws, but a violation of the trust we have as neighbors and community members. Several people in the audience nodded along. Susan showed more slides with quotes from concerned neighbors about increased traffic and noise. She had statements from the Hendersons about how they had seen suspicious-looking people coming and going from my property. The Chens complained about hearing power tools on weekends. When Susan finished her presentation, the room erupted in scattered applause. Then it was my turn to respond. Marcus stood first. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Marcus Chen, attorney representing Mr. Brennan. I want to address the allegations Ms. Whitmore has presented. First, Mr. Brennan is not operating an illegal business. The county zoning department has issued a formal written opinion stating that his activity does not require any special permits and is fully compliant with residential zoning regulations. I have copies of that letter for anyone who would like to review it." He distributed copies to Susan and several board members. Second, the characterization of Mr. Brennan's renters as suspicious or criminal is defamatory and based on no evidence whatsoever. The individuals renting his workshop space are hobbyists and enthusiasts working on personal projects, ordinary citizens pursuing their interests just as Mr. Brennan does. I stood up next. I want to address my neighbors directly. I moved to this community because I thought it was a place where I could live peacefully and pursue my interests. I built my workshop legally, with proper permits, following all rules and regulations. When the HOA required architectural approval, I submitted my application and received approval from the committee. Then, Susan decided she wanted to use my workshop for community purposes without paying me. When I declined, she began a campaign of harassment that has lasted months. She has called code enforcement on me multiple times. She has filed false reports with the fire department. She has issued dozens of petty violation notices for minor issues, all because I would not give her free access to my private property. The workshop rental activity I am conducting is legal, documented, and no different than many other ways people monetize their property. Some of you rent rooms through Airbnb. Some rent parking spaces. Some run home-based businesses like consulting or online sales. I am simply allowing people to use my workshop space a few times per week under my direct supervision. This is not a commercial operation. This is personal property sharing, and I have every legal right to do it. An older gentleman in the back stood up. "I am Richard Torres, and I have lived in this neighborhood for 22 years. I have watched Susan Whitmore drive multiple families out of this community with her harassment and power trips. This is just her latest crusade. Isaac has been nothing but a good neighbor. His workshop is quiet, well-maintained, and not visible from the street. The people I have seen coming and going look like ordinary folks working on their hobbies. This whole thing is ridiculous." Another person stood up, a woman I recognized from a few streets over. "I am Maria Santos. My son rented Isaac's workshop space last month to work on a project for his college engineering class. Isaac was helpful, professional, and the space was perfect for what my son needed. This is a valuable resource for the community, not a problem." The meeting devolved into arguments and debates. Some people supported Susan's position, worried about property values and setting bad precedents. Others defended me and criticized Susan's approach. It went on for almost 2 hours. Finally, Robert Hendricks called for order. We need to vote on whether to take legal action against Mr. Brennan on behalf of the HOA. The vote was closer than Susan probably expected. 32 in favor of legal action, 28 opposed. The HOA would be filing a lawsuit against me. Marcus and I left the meeting exhausted. They are actually going to sue me? I asked. They are going to try, but they are on weak legal ground. They are essentially trying to prohibit legal use of your property through HOA authority. The CCRs give them broad powers, but those powers cannot override state and county law. We will fight this, and I am confident we will win. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later in Riverside County Superior Court. The HOA alleged that my workshop rental activity violated the CCRs by constituting a commercial business operation in a residential community, that it created a nuisance through increased traffic and noise, and that it negatively impacted property values. They sought an injunction preventing me from continuing the rental activity and monetary damages for the alleged harm to the community. Marcus filed a response denying all allegations and countersuing for harassment, abuse of authority, and selective enforcement of HOA rules. We documented every instance of Susan's harassment, every petty violation notice, every attempt to force me to give her access to my workshop. We included Frank's testimony about how Susan had driven other families out of the neighborhood. We included statements from my renters attesting to the peaceful nature of the activity. The legal process was slow and expensive. Discovery took months. Depositions were scheduled and rescheduled. My initial retainer to Marcus ran out, and I had to pay another $5,000 to keep him on the case. The HOA had deeper pockets, funded by everyone's dues, so they could drag things out as long as they wanted. During this time, I continued renting my workshop, but very selectively, only to people I had vetted thoroughly and only a few times per month. I documented everything obsessively. I installed security cameras covering my entire property to record anyone who came and went. I kept noise meters running during rental periods to prove we were not creating excessive noise. Susan continued her surveillance. I would catch her driving slowly past my house multiple times per day. She would sit in her car down the street with a camera. It was creepy and unsettling. I filed a police report about the harassment, and an officer came out to take my statement. He said unless she threatened me directly or trespassed on my property, there was not much they could do. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for August, 9 months after Susan first appeared at my workshop door. Marcus and I arrived at the courthouse in downtown Riverside on a sweltering summer morning. The courtroom was older but well-maintained, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that hummed quietly. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Rebecca Hawthorne. She had a reputation for being no-nonsense and fair. Both legal teams presented their opening arguments. The HOA's attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Donald Pierce, argued that the HOA had broad authority to regulate property use in order to maintain community standards and property values, and that my commercial activity violated those standards. Marcus countered that the HOA's authority was limited by state and county law, that my activity was explicitly legal under county zoning regulations, and that the HOA was selectively enforcing rules as part of a harassment campaign against me specifically. Judge Hawthorne listened carefully to both sides, occasionally asking clarifying questions. After the opening arguments, she said, I am going to hear testimony from both parties before making any preliminary rulings. Let us start with the plaintiff. Mr. Pierce, call your first witness. Susan took the stand. She was dressed impeccably in a navy suit, her hair perfectly styled. She testified about her role as HOA president, her responsibility to maintain community standards, and her concerns about my workshop rental activity. Miss Whitmore, when did you first become aware of Mr. Brennan's workshop? Pierce asked. In September of last year. I noticed the structure had been built without architectural approval. And what was your initial response? I visited Mr. Brennan to inform him of the violation and to offer him a solution that would benefit the entire community. What solution did you offer? I suggested that the workshop could be used for community purposes, for HOA meetings and activities. This would have saved the HOA rental expenses and provided a valuable amenity for residents. How did Mr. Brennan respond to this generous offer? He refused. He was hostile and unwilling to cooperate. Marcus stood for cross-examination. Miss Whitmore, when you offered to use Mr. Brennan's workshop for community purposes, did you offer to pay rent? Susan hesitated. It was meant to be a cooperative arrangement. That is a no. You wanted free use of his $40,000 workshop, correct? I was offering him a way to avoid fines and penalties. So it was an ultimatum. Give us free use of your property or face harassment and fines. Is that accurate? I would not characterize it that way. Marcus pulled out a stack of documents. Miss Whitmore, how many violation notices have you issued to Mr. Brennan in the past year? I do not have an exact number. I do. 37 separate violations for issues like trash cans visible from the street, minor lawn imperfections, and faded paint on house numbers. How many violation notices did you issue to other properties in the same neighborhood during that period? I would have to check the records. Let me save you the trouble. According to HOA records from Discovery, you issued a total of 12 violation notices to all other properties combined during that same period. Does it strike you as unusual that one homeowner received over 75% of all violations? Mr. Brennan's property had more issues. Or you were targeting him specifically because he refused to give you what you wanted. The cross-examination continued, with Marcus systematically dismantling Susan's credibility. He got her to admit she had called code enforcement multiple times, that she had personally surveilled my property, that she had gone door to door soliciting signatures for her petition with inflammatory language about criminals and property values. By the time Susan left the stand, she looked rattled. Her careful composure had cracked. The HOA called several neighbors to testify about increased traffic and noise. The Hendersons described seeing multiple vehicles at my property on weekends. The Chens complained about hearing power tools. But under cross-examination, Marcus got them to admit that they heard power tools from multiple properties in the neighborhood on weekends, that the traffic to my property was no more than any house that regularly had guests, and that they had never actually witnessed any problematic behavior from anyone visiting my workshop. Then it was our turn to present evidence. I took the stand and told my story from beginning to end. I explained how I had legally built my workshop, how Susan had tried to coerce me into giving her free access, how I had been harassed for months, and how I had started the rental activity as a legal way to monetize my property and connect with fellow enthusiasts. Marcus entered the county zoning letter into evidence, along with all my rental agreements, payment receipts, and documentation showing the legitimate nature of the activity. We called several of my renters to testify, including Steve the accountant, Tom who restored the Mustang, and Maria Santos's son, who had used the workshop for his college project. They all testified that the workshop was well maintained, that I was always present during their rental periods, and that the activity was quiet and professional. Frank took the stand and testified about Susan's history of harassing homeowners and driving families out of the neighborhood. He described how she had tried to intimidate him years ago and backed down when he stood up to her. We called an expert witness, a real estate appraiser, who testified that my workshop actually increased my property value and had no negative impact on surrounding properties. In fact, several comparable properties in the neighborhood had similar outbuildings that contributed positively to home values. The hearing lasted 3 full days. By the end, I was mentally and emotionally exhausted. Judge Hawthorne took the matter under submission and said she would issue a ruling within 30 days. Those 30 days were agonizing. I could not work on projects in my workshop without worrying about the outcome. If the judge ruled against me, I would have to stop renting the space and might even face financial damages. If she ruled in my favor, maybe Susan would finally leave me alone. The ruling came via email from Marcus on a Friday afternoon in early September, almost exactly 1 year after this nightmare began. I was at work when my phone buzzed with his message. "Call me as soon as you can." I stepped outside and called him. "What is the verdict?" "Complete victory. Judge Hawthorne ruled in your favor on every single point. She found that your workshop rental activity is legal and does not violate any zoning laws or HOA authority. She found that the HOA selectively enforced rules against you as retaliation for refusing to give them free access to your property. She issued an injunction preventing the HOA from interfering with your legal use of your property, and she is awarding you attorney's fees and damages. I leaned against the wall, feeling relief wash over me. How much in damages? $65,000, plus your attorney's fees, which came to about $48,000. The HOA has to pay you $113,000 total. Oh my God, it gets better. The judge also issued a finding that Susan Whitmore abused her authority as HOA president and recommended the board consider removing her from that position. She cited Susan's pattern of harassment and selective enforcement as evidence of unfitness for leadership. I actually laughed. So it is really over. As far as the lawsuit goes, yes. The HOA can appeal, but based on the strength of the judge's ruling and findings, I doubt they will. They would just be throwing good money after bad. I went home that evening and sat in my workshop, just taking it all in. 1 year of stress, legal battles, harassment, and anxiety was finally over. I had won. The bully had lost. But the story was not quite finished yet. 3 days after the ruling, I received a call from David Yu, the HOA secretary who had supported my architectural application. "Isaac, I wanted to let you know that Susan resigned as HOA president this morning. Robert Hendricks is taking over temporarily until we can hold elections next month. The board voted unanimously to accept the judge's ruling and not pursue an appeal. We will be processing your payment within the next few weeks." "That is good to hear, David. Thank you for supporting me through all of this. I am sorry it got as bad as it did. Some of us tried to rein Susan in, but she had a lot of influence. Hopefully, things will be different going forward." Susan's resignation was just the beginning of her downfall. 2 weeks later, several homeowners filed a motion to audit the HOA's finances. When the audit was conducted, it revealed some disturbing findings. Over the past 3 years, Susan had approved numerous payments to her husband's landscaping company for work around the community at rates significantly higher than market value. She had also reimbursed herself over $15,000 for various HOA-related expenses that were either never incurred or grossly inflated. The evidence pointed to embezzlement and fraud. The HOA board voted to file a complaint with the Riverside County District Attorney's Office. A criminal investigation was opened. I learned all this from Frank, who remained plugged into the neighborhood gossip network. They are saying Susan might have stolen over $100,000 from the HOA over the years, Frank told me over beers in my workshop one evening. Payments to shell companies, fake expense reimbursements, padded invoices. She was treating the HOA bank account like her personal piggy bank. How did no one notice? She controlled all the information. She was president, so she decided what got reported to the board and what did not. Patricia Morrison was treasurer, but she just rubber-stamped whatever Susan told her to. It is a good reminder that HOAs need oversight and accountability. In November, Susan Whitmore was arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The charges alleged she had stolen over $120,000 from the HOA over a 4-year period. The case made the local news, with reporters describing how an HOA president had abused her position to enrich herself while harassing homeowners who did not comply with her demands. The criminal case took months to wind through the system. Susan's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office was not interested in going easy on her. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, invoices, emails, and testimony from multiple HOA board members all pointed to a systematic scheme to defraud the HOA. In March of the following year, Susan pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts in exchange for a recommended sentence of 4 years in state prison and full restitution to the HOA. The judge accepted the plea deal, and Susan was led away in handcuffs. I did not attend the sentencing hearing. I had moved on with my life. My workshop rental business continued to thrive, but I kept it small and manageable. I had a core group of regular customers who became friends. Tom and I worked on his Mustang together almost every weekend. Steve finished the toy chest for his daughter and started building an entire bedroom furniture set. New people discovered my workshop through word of mouth, and I enjoyed meeting fellow enthusiasts and sharing knowledge. The new HOA board, led by David Yu as the new president, was reasonable and fair. They focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement and power trips. Property values in the neighborhood actually increased as word spread that the toxic leadership was gone. Frank and I became close friends. We spent many evenings in my workshop, him sharing stories from his firefighting days while I worked on various projects. He taught me some welding techniques he had learned during his career, and I helped him restore an old fire department bell he had saved from a demolished station. I received the payment from the HOA for $113,000 in October, 16 months after Susan first knocked on my workshop door. I used some of it to pay off the last of my attorney's fees and workshop construction costs. I donated $10,000 to a legal aid fund that helps homeowners fight HOA abuse. I put the rest into savings and investments. Looking back on everything that happened, I learned some valuable lessons. First, document everything when dealing with an HOA or any authority figure who might abuse their power. My meticulous record keeping was crucial to winning my case. Second, do not be afraid to stand up to bullies, even when it is expensive and exhausting. Susan counted on people giving up, and she had successfully driven away multiple families before me. By standing my ground, I not only protected my own rights but helped expose her corruption and protect future homeowners. Third, find good allies. Marcus, Frank, David, and others who supported me made all the difference. The workshop still stands in my backyard, heated and comfortable even on cold winter days. The sound of tools and the smell of metal and wood fill the space regularly. I finished restoring both motorcycles, and they run beautifully. The 1972 Honda CB 750 took first place at a vintage motorcycle show in San Diego last summer. The Triumph Bonneville is my regular rider, and I take it out on weekend canyon runs through the hills outside Riverside. I rent the workshop space a few times per week to people who appreciate having access to quality tools and a dedicated workspace. Each person who walks through that door has a story, a project, a passion they are pursuing. I love being part of that. I love the community that has formed around the space. Susan is in prison, paying for her crimes against the community she claimed to be protecting. The HOA is rebuilding its reputation and finances under new leadership. The neighborhood is quieter, friendlier, and more genuinely community-oriented than it was under Susan's authoritarian rule. As for me, I am just a guy who wanted to build a workshop and pursue his hobbies. I never wanted to be involved in legal battles, HOA politics, or criminal investigations. But sometimes life puts challenges in front of you, and you have to decide whether to back down or stand up for what is right. I am glad I stood up. I am glad I fought back. And I am glad that my workshop, the source of so much conflict and stress, ultimately became exactly what I always wanted it to be. A place where I and others can create, learn, and pursue our passions without interference. The whole experience taught me that HOAs can be beneficial when led by people with good intentions who genuinely want to improve their communities. But they can also be weapons of harassment and control when led by people like Susan, who abuse their authority for personal gain or ego. Homeowners need to pay attention to who is leading their HOAs, demand transparency and accountability, and not be afraid to challenge rules and leaders that overstep their proper bounds. My property at 2847 Willow Creek Lane in Riverside, California, is my sanctuary now. The workshop hums with activity and creativity. The motorcycles gleam in the California sunshine. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that I did not just fight for my own rights, but helped make my community a better place by exposing corruption and standing up to a bully who had terrorized neighbors for years. That is worth more than any amount of money or any legal victory. It is the knowledge that when tested, I did not back down. I stood my ground, fought the good fight, and won. And my heated workshop, the thing Susan Whitmore demanded and tried so hard to control, remains mine, used on my terms, shared with people I choose, and generating income that helps support my hobbies and lifestyle. Every time I walk into that workshop and fire up a tool or start working on a project, I remember everything that happened and feel grateful. Grateful for the legal system that ultimately protected my rights. Grateful for the friends and allies who stood by me. Grateful for the opportunity to turn a harassment campaign into a thriving side business and community resource. And grateful that justice, though sometimes slow, eventually prevailed. The workshop door is open, the heater is running, and there is work to be done. That is all I ever wanted, and that is exactly what I have.